Welcome everybody to the 2025 Locations Behind the Oscars call with the LMGI. Today we have with us the location professionals behind the Oscar nominated films I'm Still Here, Anora, Nickel Boys, and A Complete Unknown. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a little bit about the LMGI. The LMGI is a nonprofit created to for the sole purpose of promoting the creative contributions of location professionals worldwide. And as you all know, we generally do not get the credit for our creative contributions for what we do. So this was the LMGI's origins. And we do this through a number of programs, including calls like we're doing today, the LMGI Awards, which for which submissions will be open next week, as well as the Compass Magazine. And we also present at booths and different venues like Focus in London, Comic-Con, and the like. If you don't know us, please visit locationmanagers.org. I want to introduce our moderators: Miguel Tapia, Sasha Alvarez Denisoff, Gina Vreeland, and myself, yours truly, JJ Levine. So with all that said, we'll just jump in with Anthony Pisani from A Complete Unknown. And just an intro about that film if you haven't seen it. It's based on the 2015 book, Dylan Goes Electric, which portrays Bob Dylan through his earliest years, from his transition from folk music to rock and roll and going electric. It was nominated for 8 awards: Best Screenplay, Best Screenplay Adaptation, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actress, Best Director, Supporting Actor, Best Picture, Best Costume Design, and Best Sound. We have with us Anthony Pisani, who is known also for Challengers, Joker, Folie à Deux, and American Horror Story. And Anthony, how did you get your start in locations?
First off, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. How did I get my start in locations? I guess for starters, I grew up, my family had a restaurant in Abbatinos. It's still there in Westchester County. And I would always work there, and talking to a customer, I got a job into the industry. Started off as a PA and then just eventually just landed in locations. That's pretty much it.
And this film, this must have been when you got, how did it come about when you were hired on this film? Like, you must have been thrilled.
Oh, I was completely ecstatic. I had just finished a movie called Ezra, at De Niro and Bobby Cannavale, that was filmed in Jersey, and I worked with Carla Raj and Mike Bonanno on that, who was the UPM AUPM. So Carla is the one who I've developed a great relationship with, and she's the one who brought me on to A Complete Unknown. She didn't finish the movie after the strike, but yeah, no, it was awesome when she gave me the opportunity. I was like, pretty much, work was a little slow at that point. I was working on American Horror Stories, just like scouting, and she called me, and I was like, wow, awesome, this is a great opportunity. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking to portray the life of Bob Dylan, and recreating the village in the 60s. And it sounds like your production designer was kind of a stickler for details. How did that go? Like, was there a were you guys trying to film at the real locations, and did you end up at any of the real locations? And what was that process like getting out of the gate?
So yeah, it was very funny. Francois Adouy, the production designer, he's great. I love him. But yeah, he's definitely a stickler. He first started off with like, oh yeah, nothing needs to be textbook. We'll have like complete freedom. We can change things. And then we had this lookbook that we would scout for. And then what do you know? Everything had to be exactly as he found from the reference photos. I guess, New York wise, we only had one day in New York. And it was literally just the court steps with Ed Norton for 60 Center Street, right after the court case, and then the Chelsea Hotel. We had a couple other things, like one like shot of him hitchhiking by the GW Bridge, but never made the movie.
We're gonna come back to the Chelsea Hotel,
Oh
but
yeah.
because I want to hear, I know you have a story about that, and I want to hear, we all want to hear that story. But just chronologically going through the film, where's the mental institution where Dylan meets Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger? Was that was a pretty cool spot.
Yeah, that was on location for supposed to be Greystone Hospital, which is now obviously demolished. It used to be like a psychiatric ward in New Jersey. Took forever to find it. It was, very stressful because that's like such an important part of the movie. But Aaron Herberts, who was scouting this movie years even before I came on, he literally found it our last day of work before the strike shut us down. And yeah, that was at the Dayton School in Newark. I'm sure some people might have filmed there. I know Walking Dead filmed there. It is literally just like an abandoned school where Newark pretty much all the rest of the school systems there kind of store shit. So excuse my language. But yeah, it was just literally just a cool like stage almost on location to work at. Coincidentally, I was looking at it for the job I'm on now, but I think it's getting demolished in a
Ooh,
couple months. So
well, that's sort of sad. It sounds like the
yeah,
loss of a great location that you guys go to a lot.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad. So let's just jump in there. Let's talk about the strike because believe me, I have a ton of other questions, but you did mention that the strike shut us down. Where were you guys in the process when that happened?
We were literally 2, 3 weeks from tech scouting, a week or maybe a week from doing plate stuff, and we still had a lot of missing locations. It was kind of a blessing and a curse. Obviously, no one wanted to strike. But in terms of making this movie, we didn't have enough prep time. We didn't have enough time with the director or the designer. Like Jim didn't come in until literally a month before the tech scout. So if there's anything that the designer thought was great when I was with him, and we had to go back to square one after Jim seeing it, we did not have much time, to turn around and get things done. Um, but otherwise, because of the strike, I lost a few people that were in my department at the time because they picked up shows earlier before we restarted, and then they complete production. Pretty much, I would say 80% of the crew was different. Like
Mm.
Grip, Electric. Besides Francois in the art department, the rest of his people, were all different. So it was a little bit of a challenge getting everyone acclimated and back, but at least we got like another 10 to 12 weeks of prep,
Right.
where we were 4 weeks from tech scouting. That being said, Jim after the strike wrote in like 15 more locations just to add to it. So but yeah, it was something.
Right, that's a little crazy. Pete Seeger's cabin, where that's a pretty cool spot. That's not in your photo deck. I know Anthony's gonna share a photo deck with us in a little bit, you guys, but but that's an interesting because it's mid-century, but it seems like it's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's we took forever to find that. Like we were scouring like Northwest Jersey, and then eventually like we ended up west on the northern side in a town called Blairstown, that Aaron also found. But yeah, it was a cool house. I don't want to talk about it too much because I don't have good memories from that place.
Uh,
They completely had to like, Edward, they did a cast rehearsal like a week before shooting or like the weekend before shooting. And then Edward Norton asked for all these changes. So whatever the scenics had to change and do completely messed up the house. It was a huge restoration. And we had to do reshoots that we had to build at the stage. We almost built the porch and the bedroom at the stage that we had to finish, but it was a whole thing. It was not
wow,
fun.
that is not fun. All right, well, let's talk about the one of the big kernels, the big nuggets, which was recreating the Newport Folk Festival and how you guys did that because it's incredible. I mean, and it looks like you just took over a whole town. So did you just take over a whole town?
So for the folk festival itself, where like the music, act takes place, that was just a park in Union County called Echo Lake Park in New Jersey. That was pretty contained. That one was pretty easy, besides just being at that park for like, 4 months. But Cape May was the whole Newport, Rhode Island cheat for the streets. The Viking Hotel, which was our hero hotel, was actually called the Victorian. It was kind of funny. But no, that was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. Cape May really never had any big filming or any filming in general before. So we had to do a lot of hand holding, but the positives are about that. The positives that come with that is as long as you do a good job, which we did, everyone's excited. They're not sticklers saying no right away. They're just really excited about the project. and they pretty much gave us the keys to the city. I mean, they didn't really say no to anything. It was a little scary at first because when we came back after the strike, I didn't even clock it into our first meeting with them, but our new week of shooting, the Sunday where we traveled and shot, was Mother's Day. So like that was like their town was very worried about how that would, the town would react, but we had our little barricades like around the set and everything, and everyone just watched and they enjoyed it. The businesses, everyone was happy, everyone was cool. So, it ended up being just a great time. And that was the one time where the crew was put up, so it was just, I would say that was my favorite week of filming the movie for sure.
Well, it looks like one giant party, and especially if the crew's all staying there
Oh, it
while
was,
the
yeah.
giant party is going on. It looked pretty amazing. You have some photos of that. You want to share your screen?
Yeah. This was like Mother's Day pretty much. Or I don't know if this was Mother's Day, but it was just, this is like where our barricades were and we had the crowd. And
It's
then I
from
really
the
only have,
hotel looking out. Yeah, this is what.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So this was pretty much our entire you know, section, that we had pretty much, give or take.
so had you barricaded off all the streets, or what was your?
We had barricades and a police officer pretty much there. I mean, it's hard to show here, but I don't know if you can see
Mhm.
my mouse. We had it all the way down here. We had this whole street blocked off, this to the left behind, and everything behind us. So we had almost like a half square mile, I guess, just like that we just kind of took control of for just, streets, motorcycle shots, driving through town. And obviously the majority of it taking place just right here, in this little hub that we had.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I can't imagine being in this town with the celebrities that you were with, and just what a crazy scene that must have been. Let's shift gears for a second, and you keep your pictures up, I think, and talk about the Chelsea Hotel.
Oh yeah, the Chelsea Hotel. So early on in prep, we scouted it. And we met with this guy. I won't even say his name because I don't want to put a bad rep on him, but he was like running their marketing department at
Well,
the Hotel Chelsea.
let's jump in, Anthony, for a second. Just for the people that may not know, can you give a little history of what the why the Chelsea Hotel, what it is, and why it's important, and why it was important to the film?
Yeah, I mean, it was just pretty much like a famous hub for like a bunch of artists back in the day. Like now it's obviously really expensive, wealthy people live there. Their apartments are very nice, but it used to be just struggling artists. That was like where they all hung out, where they all worked. That's where definitely Joan Baez stayed. Bob Dylan also stayed there, like Janis Joplin, Sid Vicious, Madonna. It was just a huge hub for artists pretty much. And obviously it's a landmark in the city and it's very well known. So it was a very important part of the movie. So the idea of potentially not having it was terrifying or not being able to, give Jim in the movie this.
Right. So then, okay, I'm sorry. So jump back into your story. So you met with the marketing director, and
yeah, and he told me yeah, this is all good. Got into pricing and all that. And then a few weeks later, he goes, actually, no, the ownership isn't going to allow it. Kept following up with him, tried going there, wouldn't answer. And the strike came, we didn't have it, obviously, but it was like a big thing. We were looking at what the heck we would cheat it for. Strike came back. I go back in and I do some more research and we find another name for marketing. And I go and speak to this woman who's amazing. I forgot her name. I apologize. And I meet the GM of the hotel as well. And I mentioned about this guy and what happened. Apparently that guy only kind of repped one of the ownerships. Like there's 3 owners of the Chelsea Hotel and he had no authority even telling us if we could or could not film there. So they were like, I can't believe we almost lost this opportunity, because they were excited for it. Obviously there were a lot of restrictions to filming there after we got, all the permissions and everything. Of course, because of their new hotel, or Chelsea Cafe that they have, like this new restaurant, they had all these non-period, heavy, ugly Moroccan vases that were huge, 400 plus pounds, that they didn't want us to move. So we had to shoot around it and kind of maybe VFX some of it out. But at one point we were still considering finding an alternative, which it would have been silly if we didn't shoot here, but they always figure it out. And luckily we did, because, it looked amazing.
it
And it was
did
our
look
only really
amazing.
true New York location for sure.
You did not shoot New York for New York, and you have some photos that, can you go through those and just sort of describe what those areas were and what you were, because there were a lot of big takeovers of places, I feel like, for this film.
Yeah, I don't have much in these photos. I apologize, but this was the whole Patterson backlot that I'm sure lots of people know. I think West Side Story filmed here. I'm not sure if The Bride did or not, but they were looking over here too. This is that whole Ellison Street, if you're familiar with New Jersey back there. We treated this as the East Village for Bob and Sylvie's date. And that was just one day. And then we had like an exterior shot too, behind City Hall. This is my only unfortunate shot that I have of the McDougal Hub, which was in Jersey City, which was probably our biggest set, our most expensive set outside of Cape May, at least from a location standpoint. And yeah, and then Hoboken, which I don't really have many photos of, was just our like residential, West Village brownstones or townhouses that we kind of filmed where like Bob lived and Bob and Sylvie. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah, you wanna, there was another shot that I thought was super cool.
Do you know which one?
No, I don't know now.
Is
Which
it the
maybe we saw it.
Newport shots or?
It probably was the Chelsea, I think. That's great. Well, anything else before we move on to Nora and Gina Vreeland, that you want to share with us about the making of Complete Unknown?
I mean, it was a great experience. Like every job, it has its ups and downs, but I think that pretty much covers it from my end. It was great. I had a great team on it, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So shout out to everyone who was on the movie, working locations with me. And yeah, thank you everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
You did a great job. We're going to turn it over to Gina Vreeland and Ross Broder to talk about Nora.
I'm here with Ross Broder, the location manager for Nora. He was also nominated last year for an LMGI award for outstanding locations, and I could see why, because I'm actually quite impressed. I watched Nora, and from what I read, it's a low budget film. And when I saw the locations, I was impressed because, you had to, for a low budget, you had to find a mansion, you had to find a nightclub, you're filming in Coney Island, you're filming in Vegas. So you're going to have to tell me like how you did all that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that intro. Yeah, I mean, as everybody knows here, it's certainly challenging when you don't have much money with locations and you got to kind of rely on being very charming to, maneuver. The mansion was obviously the key, and I got lucky because Sean had actually found the mansion like on the internet and was like, "You see this place? Like this is where we got to shoot." So when I went over there and met the owners, we kind of just hit it off, The owner, Michael Davidoff, and his family are just sweet people. They're quite wealthy, and I kind of convinced them that this was like a love letter to Brooklyn and Coney Island and Brighton and the Russian community, and attacked it that way because I think initially he wanted like 30 grand a day to shoot in the mansion, and it was like, I can give you 30 grand maybe for like 3.5 weeks or something. It was like, one of those type of things. So, and one of the things was he was worried about security, so I said, you know what, I'll live there the whole time. I'll move in. And he was like, great. So that was part of it. I lived there for the entire prep, shoot, wrap, which was fun and, interesting because there was no rest. I mean, none at all, between actors showing up at 4 a.m. and taking over rooms and kicking me out, or like Sean would, rehearse with the actors on the weekend. But it was cool. Like that was definitely part of it. And then the other part of it was, as location people know, like the Russians and the Chinese are really hard to break into their communities. So without a liaison, it's kind of tough sometimes. But I was able to find a young woman who lived out there with her mother, grew up out there. And so for the first week or so, I went to a lot of places with her and did the whole spiel of, this is a love letter, you want to be a part of this. We have a certain amount of locations, and I think you should get involved. So that's kind of how I attacked it. And the charm of it all and that kind of like communal vibe actually helped it, go down.
Wow. And how long did you have to prep? Because I know with like these low budget projects, a lot of times they don't give you a lot of time to do what you need to do.
I got a little lucky with that. I had some soft prep time where I had explained to the producers that like I needed to kind of go hang out there and be seen and go with this young lady and kind of infiltrate and eat borscht at Tatiana's and like just, have coffee down the block at the Ocean Cafe and just be. So I had a little bit of time. I don't remember being really extremely pressed, you know. There's always that one or two locations that like during the film you're still looking for or something happens. And so there was a couple of those things that happened, but I had a reasonable amount of time. Maybe I had 6 weeks of prep or 5 weeks, but it was doable.
Okay, and then how many location, I mean, was it 100% on location or did you have anything on stage?
We had nothing on stage. It was all on location. We had to get creative, like the club scenes where we're looking at him partying different clubs, we're going to different clubs. There was a couple clubs in Brighton Beach, one of them called Sky that has 3 huge rooms that are all different. So we took over the place and then we just dressed them all. So, we made it feel like we went to all these different spots. We shot some exteriors and we put it together. So we were able to get a bunch of locations out of one location for that. And the crawl where they're looking for Ivan was set up where we figured we were just going to push move down up and down Brighton Beach. And, we had to kind of work that out with everybody that we were going to, that was the most challenging thing. We had to crash everybody's party live. So I had to kind of explain to the owners, like, we're looking for this character in the movie, but we want to do it in real life. And we got them to play along, especially at Tatiana's Grill. Irina, the woman that was running it, was like, "Come on down on a Wednesday night. We get completely drunk with all my friends. They won't know what the hell's going on, and just go for it." And we did. And like the first couple takes were great, and then like by take 3 or 4, they were getting a little like pissed, and like they were so we kind of convinced Sean we better get out of there before we start throwing down, you know.
Yeah. So I saw an interview where the actress spent 5 months learning how to pole dance. And then ultimately, you guys went for a nightclub that didn't have a pole. And so, and I guess because the actress worked so hard learning how to pole dance, they were able to squeeze in like 10 seconds, of that. But what was it about the club that the director liked? Why did he choose that particular club?
So that's a funny story. What happened was, I'm 53. I've been married for some time. I haven't been to some strip clubs in a while. So when he asked me to go do it, it's not like I had a Rolodex in my head of where to go necessarily. Basically knew, but I was like, all right, let me figure out what's new in the city, what's going on. And when I stumbled upon HQ in Rosewood, and I walked in there, I was like, what is this? It was like courtesans, like women just come up to you, chat you up, take you into a corner, give you a dance, no poles. There was a bathtub in the middle of the downstairs. And then upstairs were like the back room vibe. And I'm like, what is this about? So when I told Sean about it, he's like, oh, we got to check that out. He's like, Ross, he's like, I had it in my mind that it was a strip club because that's what you think of, but like everybody's seen that in movies. Who's seen this with like the back rooms and the whole? So he just fell in love with it immediately and was so happy that it was a little bit of an out of the box one that I threw in there. And once we saw that, he didn't want to see anything else. He's like, make it happen there. So that's how that happened.
Okay. And were there any moments, because I've had experiences when I, had a strip club as a location. And sometimes, between like the actresses who are scantily clad and, and the privacy needed, and you're dealing with the rooster of the house. Were there any moments with the location where you had awkward conversations?
We had some stuff. So, first of all, we had to get in there right at the end of their night, right? Like, whatever, 4 a.m. And we had to do our thing and get out of there by 5:30 so they could open at 6. So there
Mhm.
was that. And Luckily, I met, I met the women that were running the girls there, and Sean and Sammy, his wife and producer, had asked me if I could kind of make some introductions. So I had a bunch of girls that worked there, introed them, and they were in the movie as well. So they knew the lay of the land or whatever. But yes, they're all running around scantily clad. We made a ton of announcements about respecting their privacy, et cetera, et cetera. We had this one guy, we'll definitely not say his name. I don't think I even remember his name, but he was a background PA. And this guy shows up with two Polaroid cameras, like with like this like getup, and he's taking Polaroids of the girls suddenly. And one of the girls comes up and is like, this guy's taking Polaroids of us. And like at first we were like cool with it, but then we're asking for them back and he won't give them back. And I just snatched this guy up and I was like, dude, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm a photographer. I'm like, you're not a photographer on this movie. You're a background PA guy supposed to protect these women. And long story short, he was gone within like 10 minutes of finding that out. I mean, it was
Good.
ridiculous. Yeah, it was
Good.
so, yeah, we had that moment. But other than that, it was cool. Like everybody respected. In fact, when those shots that you see where they're all dancing and whatever, the first AD, Lisa, made sure that everybody was turned away, that wasn't involved in having to be a part of that. And it was a very respectful, let them do their thing. Nobody was gawking and, staring and stuff like that.
Okay, great. So now you guys went to Vegas. Who scouted out in Vegas?
So the Vegas thing was not, I had nothing to do with the Vegas thing. The Vegas thing was 3 days. Funny enough, that was another one of those like, well, we're going to go to Atlantic City. Like, where are we going to go do this? Because we weren't sure if we could pull it off financially. And it was just kind of like the producers were working on it till the end of the movie to get the money up to go out there. And they found a scout out there and somebody to put a crew to meet some of our crew. And they went out in there and did that. So, but I didn't go for that.
Yeah, so I was wondering, between Atlantic City and Vegas, what was the, deciding factor? Like it's just
Sean, Sean wants the real deal. Like if he has his druthers, he wants it to be as real as possible. So I think in the end, he really just pushed for wanting the grandeur of Vegas. And they had those other scenes when it gets annulled and all that stuff. He just wanted, he just pushed hard and was like, I know we could do interior stuff and make it look like a casino, but I want Vegas. And he got it.
well, he did a good job, but thanks to you,
Well,
you know.
just a piece of the wheel.
Which location was your favorite out of all the locations managing?
I mean, I think I had the most fun at the mansion, to be honest with you. The mansion was fun for a ton of reasons, but the whole crew was hunkered down there for 3 weeks. So everybody had their little, spot and their niche, and there was so much action and so many things that were going on around that place that it just became a lot of fun to navigate it and make sure it went down correctly.
So tell us about the plate.
Okay. So the plate situation. I don't know. Do you want to pull up a photo and we could look at it together?
Yeah, hold on. All right. So
as you're pulling it up, so here's the deal. The people there, yeah, that's a good shot. So here we are. I've got a Bible. We've got like kippas on our head because we're about to bury this plate that one of our PAs cooked a pork chop on. And what happened was the owners were extremely religious Jews, and I guess they had been watching through the security system at night and saw that this guy was cooking up a pork chop on their stove. So he calls me, he's like, Ross, my wife's gonna kill me. You can't cook non-kosher things in the house. You got to throw the plate in the garbage. And somebody had said to me, there's a tradition in the Jewish tradition where they bury the plate. So I kind of ran with that, and just because I'm a little bit of a prankster, I had told Jared, the guy in the picture with me, we got to bury the plate, and there's a ceremony for it, and if we don't do it, we might lose the location. And I made like a thing about it, and we ended up digging a hole in his backyard, wrapped up the plate up. I wrote some like wacky, Hebrew on the plate,
Is
which
it?
that's Hebrew, but it says absolutely nothing. I just like grabbed a bunch of letters and put them in succession and played it off like I, wrote some like religious thing. And it was kind of an inside joke with the whole crew. And we buried it. And one day somebody's gonna dig that plate up on that property and be like, what the hell is this? You know?
So cinematically, I really enjoyed the snow, all the snow. I live in California, and so we don't get it. And so, I often wonder when I'm watching a movie that's filmed out of state, whether or not it's planned or, or you know, created. I mean, created or yeah, or they're just working with the weather. And anyway, you provided some photos for that.
Yeah, if you scroll down to the car one first, so I could start there.
Okay.
Go ahead, click on that. So this goes to show you like indie filmmaking, snow making at its finest. This was going to be the last scene, and we were trying to figure out how to do it. And Steve Phelps was coming up with all kinds of rigs and different scenarios to see if we could pull it off because it was a mild winter. We were hoping if there was a snow day, we would like switch some stuff around on the schedule, but we couldn't. So we had to figure out a way to do it, and it just wasn't working. Like as you could see from here, even it just. If I showed you this in a video, you'd laugh because I mean he's got a box and he's shaking it, and one guy's got a squeegee on top and spraying the water, and they're trying to keep the window clean. I mean, it just wasn't working. And then if you scroll to the next one,
Down below here.
yep, you'll see that then they found this kind of like machine and this different technique to create the snow. And then they nailed it. So when she wakes up in the bedroom and you see all of that snow, that's all like a practical setup that Phelps came up with. And then they, of course, dressed the trees and they dressed the ground with like foam and different things. And it was honestly, it was astonishing when I saw the movie, the production value, what he got out of doing it with a bunch of art people with very little money. And of course, like they did some After Effects and stuff like that to enhance it. But no, I mean, it was a mild winter. There was not one snowflake at all in real life. And we were able to just get the crew to figure it out. And like, yeah, you see these blowers and stuff like that. And that's what we figured out for the, snow, the last part of the movie.
Yeah, it was beautiful cinematically.
Yeah, no, it really came out so well.
Watching it, so tell us about, you're an actor and you had a role in the movie.
Well, so here's the thing. I started out in the business wanting to act early on. And then as you said, you found out I'm also a painter. I kind of realized to do acting, you needed a lot of people. So I segued out of acting into painting. But when I got back into the business, I kind of figured out when I was being in locations as a manager that I was spending a lot of time with the directors. And so they were getting to know me during scouts and this and that. So I'd always kind of throw it out at the right time. Hey, if there's a little ditty or there's a little something, I'd love to, read for it or throw my hat in there. It's kind of like going to the beach and taking home a stone with you as a memento. And a lot of the films or shows that I've done, I've gotten these little bit parts. Sean, it was just so generous and threw me in to this role. It doesn't equal a lot of screen time, but it actually played for like 5 days as an actor. So it was really fun to kind of, get a little acting gig right in the middle of it. And it was unexpected. And yeah, and so I got to do my little thing there. That was good.
And do you are there any other little stories or things that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so if you scroll up to the helicopter, this was interesting. They wanted to do that helicopter shot where you see them on the balcony and kind of pull away. And they found a guy at JFK that could come and like zip all the way up to the house and then he was going to pull back. And it was kind of a last minute. We got the helicopter, let's do this. What do we got to do to make it safe? There was a tarp underneath like the helicopter where it was going to pull up that you know, as it was coming in, the guy was like, make sure that that tarp's secure. And we had to like run down there and secure the tarp because suddenly there was a possibility the tarp could like fly up into the helicopter. You know, like nobody had thought of that until like the pilot came and saw that there was this flapping thing. So that was kind of a hairy moment to think that maybe something really crazy could happen. And also, you know, the neighborhood was a little shaken up by the helicopter coming so close to their houses. But that was an interesting little moment.
Tell us
Um,
this, this scene being on location here.
Yeah, so this is that night when we did what we called the crawl. This is us going up and down Brighton Beach with, you know, the characters looking for Ivan. And, you know, that's sort of a little snippet of what it looked like that whole evening where we just kind of pushed up and down the block on foot. You know, we had secured a bunch of little holding spots up and down the avenue, and we were nimble, and we just kind of that's how we were rolling.
And how about this photo here?
That is the aftermath of the fight scene. And you know, that was tricky. That floor that you see it's a marble floor. So we had to cover the marble floor with like this plastic type of protective coating, but make sure it wasn't too reflective and that it would work. And it was tricky because I was really scared we were gonna like destroy this guy's floor. He had like Venetian plaster walls and a marble floor. And these were some of the promises I made when we got in there that we wouldn't wreck his house. So yeah, it's just a shot of like the aftermath, what happened. And luckily, like we didn't knock up his floor at all. It was really actually quite clever what we found as a material to protect it.
Yeah, and then tell
So
me about is this your team?
no, so the guy to the right of me with the blue and black jacket and the beard, that's Ben Wiseman. He was my ALM. So I
Okay.
had one ALM, and if you go to the shot below, I had one unit PA, and that was my location department for Enora. That was
Wow.
that was just the three of us. I did all the permits and all that kind of stuff. Ben helped me out as my ALM, doing everything else, you know. And unit had, you know, Jackson had the van, and it was just three guys.
Need to
So
be
it's
nominated again.
well, you know, but I mean, that was a trip because as everybody knows, like I've worked on a bunch of movies where I got 15 people and, you know, this was just three people. So I wanted to show those photos of these guys because I could not have done it without them. Like they were so awesome.
Yeah, no, like I said, I watched the movie, I was impressed, and now I'm even more impressed to find out how tiny your crew was.
Yeah,
You
it
know,
was three people.
and it was there anybody in the, you know, any government officials or anybody that really helped you make things happen in a pinch?
You know, let me just say it like this. The mayor's office and everybody that was working down there was really cool. They understood that things were happening organically and on the fly down there. So things that needed to change, like within the 7 day limit or whatever, if it was 4 days out or 3 days out, you know, Liz Acosta and Brianna and some of the other people that were down there were super helpful. Sergeant Torres with the movie unit was down there with us a lot. He was also really great. Sean likes to change up a lot. So we were permitted to like do a route and drive this way. And after 2 takes, he'd be bored and be like, no, 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 no. I want to go right that way and I want to go 3 miles that way. And you know, it took negotiating, but we really did. They were super cool. You know, I have to say they were really nice. They could have been a lot harder. You know.
Wow. Thanks for joining us. I have to say, I really enjoyed interviewing you, and like again, I'm really impressed.
Thank you so much for the interview. I appreciate the questions, Gina. Thanks for having me here.
We're going to segue now to Sasha is going to moderate this segment with Batu from Nickel Boys.
All right, so next up we've got Batu Chandler. She is joining us live from the French Quarter in New Orleans during the last weekend of Mardi Gras. It's a little crazy out there, so we're very happy to have her with us. She's worked on a lot of noteworthy projects that you've probably heard of, including Daisy Jones and the Six, Beguiled, 12 Years a Slave. She won the LMGI Award for Outstanding Locations in a Contemporary Series for her work on True Detective in 2015. She is fresh off her Directors Guild of America win as part of the Nickel Boys team for first time theatrical feature film, which is pretty cool. And she's here to talk to us about Nickel Boys, which is nominated for Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay. So, Batu, hi, thanks for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself, like how long you've been doing this, and like how did you get into this crazy business?
Well, I grew up in the French Quarter, between the French Quarter and Paris, and my dad was a journalist. So they'd throw me into a lot of the stories or pictures. So like Ross, I started early, sort of in front of the screen, and was intrigued by what went on behind it. And I went to a high school of creative arts in New Orleans called NOCA, which was then a very small school and is now sort of a well-known thing. And from there went to NYU Tisch, and I started in film when I was 4 and started PAing when I was 16. And then I went to NYU when I was 17. And your first year at Tisch, you're not allowed to perform in plays, but you're allowed to perform in films. So I would work on student films and trade info with like the, what's a Steenbeck, what's this, all these equipment that no longer even exists. And I was lucky enough to get some really great mentorships from some great location managers and ADs, and have been able to build a career these last 30 plus years as we all try to pick our way through this new world that we're experiencing.
It's fantastic. And then to segue into Nickel Boys, to give folks a little bit of context about the film, this is based off of Colson Whitehead's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel from 2020, I believe. And it's like a fictional historical drama that's based off of a real life reform school called the Dozier School for Boys, which was a reform school in the 1960s in Florida that of course was later discovered to have hidden just absolutely monstrous abuse of its students. So I'm curious, sort of like, working on a piece that was so sort of like culturally significant and critically acclaimed, what was the creative direction in pre-production, especially for those who don't know, pretty much all of this film was shot in like a POV style. So I'm curious how that affected locations.
Yeah, I mean, this film, for any of you who've seen it, and I hope that many do, it's definitely not a blockbuster, and it is something I've never done. And when, as we all know, like we have experience, and a lot of times you can sort of predict how things are going to go, and that was not at all the case on this project. And when I was first heard about it, it was still not clear where they were going to film it because it's set in Florida. The school, as you say, was the Dozier School for Boys, actually ran from 1903 through the 1980s until
Right.
it was actually closed. But the events that we're depicting were, as you say, in the 60s. And that's what Coulson sort of fictionalized in his book. And his book, for those who have read it, which I had, really brutal. And I had worked on things like 12 Years a Slave and Monsters Ball and The Road, where we were adapting really important literary works that are very hard to sort of live with and metabolize. And so that was deeply, sort of concerning to me, how we were going to be depicting some of what was read, because it's such a fine line with violence and depicting things like that. So I wanted to hear sort of their approach. Not that, I wouldn't have, not that I'm so great, just, it's the humanistic aspect is really important when you're depicting true events, even if they're fictionalized, as we all know. So This director, Ramel Ross, this is his first narrative feature. He was nominated for an Oscar for his first documentary, which was Hale County this evening, which I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it to see. He's a revolutionary filmmaker, but also a fine artist, and really revolutionary in his thinking. And he looks at things in a very nonlinear way. And as a Black artist, he has very, specific feelings about the ideas of violence depicted against Black people and whether that is imagery that should exist, as we move forward. And so it was really fascinating to sort of dissect, and the POV aspect, it's not actually, it's partial POV because it's actually two characters' POVs throughout it. And we're, as the audience, there's sort of a magical realism element of not knowing whose POV you're in, and sort of that sort of seasickness of what is happening, and trying to follow that thread. And it's been such an honor to be a part of this project, but also this group of films that we've been listening to about Anora and A Complete Unknown and the others that we're going to talk about, because as we were talking in this sort of preamble to this, these are really perilous times in our industry and in our world. And what I've found, having, spent many decades in this industry, is that often these are the great opportunities for real art to come through. And so all the films that we're talking about are low budget. I had just worked for Amazon, which bought MGM, but that didn't mean that MGM had any money for Nickel Boys. And even though it came from a Pulitzer Prize winning book, and I think this is what I'm hearing from all of the sort of panelists, and it's interesting the time that we're in and that we're all dealing with and how we navigate that. But what I've found through the decades is that often, as challenging and difficult as these times are, they're the most interesting artistically, and it gives an opportunity for these kind of films to have an audience. Because if all the blockbusters were doing the business they normally do, and we were all working with our full crews, we wouldn't, these kind of films probably wouldn't be in the Oscar discussion, not as many as they are. So from a Nickel Boys perspective specifically, we felt honor bound to protect the actors so that they were able to honor the material, and at the same time be knowing that although we were recreating some very difficult things, that the world that they were within was very protected. And so we know that as location professionals, we're sort of spinning plates in the background, trying to help create that harmony on set. And that was very much the case on Nickel Boys, because the academy that was chosen for a variety of production sort of reasons that may or may not have made sense. The academy that was chosen and where we were doing a principal lot of shooting was also a religious retreat. And this was coming off the George Floyd protest, because we shot Nickel Boys just prior to the end of 2022. So this was very much in the intense part of the pandemic, and in the very intense part of the country's body politic, to be doing stories like this with Black actors. And we were shooting, although we were based in New Orleans, we were shooting in rural environments in many areas, 45 to an hour drive away, that are still in the zone, so to speak, but are, a lifetime away in terms of cultural experience. And so that was very challenging, trying to firewall the world, that the creative nucleus of the film, to protect that.
I was going to ask because, given the time period and how there was a lot of social justice activism, like very specifically around this time period, like where you're filming, with this book coming out, with the subject matter, or like with the way that it's filmed, what did you have to do to really sort of like either prepare the private properties at which you were filming, or the public in some cases, for stuff that would like on open roads? Because there's some heavy stuff.
Yeah, that was a very tricky aspect, both at the school and in the town that we depict as much of the town that Elwood grows up in, was Thibodaux, Louisiana, which is a really amazing town in southeast Louisiana, rather, excuse me. And it's only 45 minutes away from New Orleans, and they've launched things that nationally you may have heard of, like the Cajun Navy, which goes to go help disasters all over the country with their airboats. They're wonderful people, but they have their own legacy of some very difficult racial history, especially during this time that we were depicting. And so I had to lean into relationships that I have with farmers and landowners down there, so who could speak for me, space similar to what Ross was talking about in terms of the Chinese and Russian communities in New Jersey and New York, which I've worked in those communities as well. It's very similar with Cajuns and these families that many generations have lived in the same place. So they're protective. So to understand that no one is judging you because we're depicting times that were painful for everyone. This is a judge-free zone. Like we're all trying to do is learn from what we've experienced and how to do better moving forward. And so everyone was really on board with that from a civic perspective, and the town of Thibodaux was wonderful to us, and Laurel Valley, which is where we did a lot of the sugarcane work. I had worked there previously on Ray decades ago for a film about Ray Charles, and we had shot in Laurel Valley. And so some of those relationships, they knew that we were going to be respectful, and that we were going to show the story with integrity. And again, we leaned into some of the context of things we hadn't used on 12 Years a Slave, but relationships that I had met there. So where we had gone into complicated subjects before, and you have to be honest with people in terms of that we are confronting some tricky issues, because you also want them to sort of be on board, to be that we're all in the same sort of climate, which is difficult when you might have different politics. But if you lean into the empathy and the kindness, then we're all sort of very similar. And we were helped by the fact that Ramel, being a fine artist as well as an educator, he spent a lot of time in the South. And this film, his documentary Hale County This Morning, is set in Alabama, and so he understood that aspect of if we're honest with people about what we're doing and explain to them our intent, then we're probably going to be, they're going to meet us in a kind place. And that was what we found, universally during that project. It was challenging in the retreat area where we were depicting the Dozier School for Boys, because they were having these religious retreats on the weekends. And sometimes that included marches, and sometimes that included tiki torches. And so trying to prepare the crew for that, and trying to prepare the retreat to understand that some of that symbology we're going to have to push back on, because it's so volatile. And so those were some very difficult conversations to have. Conversations they didn't want to have, and you can forecast to producers when they say, oh, this place is great and we should do this. And you're like, well, this is what could happen, and this is what could happen. And they're like, no, the schedule is this. And then, as we all know, these things evolve. And so yes, there was a lot of those real tough conversations, but that felt in a way as honoring Coulson's original book, as well as honoring the material and the true story of those boys, to have those tough conversations.
And what went into finding the Nickel Academy? Because it's sort of a character unto itself, like both in the book and in the film, because that's what we're seeing through
Right.
the eyes of these young men. So tell us, I guess, a little bit more about this retreat center that you ended up finding, like where it is.
Yeah, so we ended up shooting in this place called Rosaryville, which is on the edge of Ponchatoula, which is, for those of you familiar sort of with the greater New Orleans area, it's north of New Orleans across Lake Pontchartrain. And it was previously a Catholic convent, where there was a farmhouse nearby that we've filmed at over the years. And so that property sort of was on my radar. And we looked at a number of different properties, and, it was very much the studio wanted to know that the academy was findable before determining which place we were actually going to. So we were looking at places in Florida, we were looking at places in Louisiana, we were looking at places in other states. And trying to do due diligence to say, okay, this is what we could do this for here, because the number was very specific, and the way that Ramel, the director, wanted to shoot it was so specific with the cameras that we knew we were going to be, really up against some challenging things, because we were shooting, it all in location with no builds, and the money was going to be tight. So Rosaryville had a lot of components where we could move around, but it had the element that we were going to have to work around these retreats. And so that was some of the give and take of that aspect. But in a way, it helped bond the crew together. because it was sort of the cast and crew were their own nucleus and sort of, yeah, this sort of protective bubble created around us within that place. Even though they were super nice and wonderful, it was just a strange juxtaposition.
Yeah. In some of our chats before today's panel, you were kind of telling me that production was pretty much bookended by a couple of major challenges. So in the beginning, like a lot of delays with COVID, to the point that you had to find stuff that the director could direct remotely from his car, and ending with a tornado with a bunch of other stuff in between. So maybe you can talk about some of these intriguing challenges that you faced.
Yes, it's something the whole world is understanding now that we're all climate change, but Louisiana's always been on the tip of that spear. So weather is always big, and for all of us that worked during COVID, 2022 September, late September, I think the last day of September was our first day of shooting in 2022. So everyone was vaccinated by that point. We had been, as a film community, about a year and a half back into filming. So everybody thinks they kind of had the COVID of it all figured out. And then that was the fall that new variant came and just sort of surprised everyone. And so our director and first AD and a number of other crew members on the first day of filming got COVID or tested positive for COVID. And I had tested positive for COVID the week before the Tech Scout. And much like Ross was talking about in terms of moving into the mansion, we were all in it together. So we're living in a van. So when I had COVID, I was, isolated for the 48 hours over that weekend, but then I was in my own car talking to them on radio as we were scouting so that we could just keep, we were all just trying to keep moving forward. And COVID was manageable from a health perspective, that we weren't having symptoms that made it prohibitive. But yes, we had to put Ramel in a car and firewall him from everyone else so that he couldn't see. So that threw the schedule into this insanity where my locations, which much like the other panelists who've been discussing, we had a very truncated department. Normally, I would have a large department as well. And we were about 4 of us total. And so, and spread out across a huge amount of geography across the state. So we had to really work every Saturday and Sunday for the whole show, as did art department, just to accommodate the schedule changes that were necessary because of the COVID of it all in the very beginning. And so and then it pushed us, the retreats that we had promised, this religious place that we would not push into, we were pushed into all of them because it, again, threw that schedule up in the air. So, as we know, you make plans and then everything changes. So the second it sort of gets printed out on the one-liner, we know it's like headed for the shredder. So that was the attitude. My mother had passed away earlier in the year while we were doing Daisy Jones. My family was coming in from France. I had to host a funeral in the midst of it, which everyone was really sympathetic about. When we were a month out and like 2 days out, everybody's like, listen, we're going to have to focus. So, that was its own battle that we've all been through, because we've all had to deal with some level of family tragedy or personal stuff that we're going through. And, the show has to go on. And then when the tornado, New Orleans is a place that has not had a tornado history up until the last 5 or 6 years. Suddenly we've been getting a number of them in the last 5 or 6 years, and they seem to particularly like this certain part of town. And we were filming a day where we were half in the French Quarter, half in Holy Cross, which is this area in town near Araby, where that tornado ended up happening that day and affected a number of sets. We were extraordinarily lucky where we had just arrived in the French Quarter, which is the oldest part of the city where I am now. And that is therefore the most solid part of the city, because it's the highest ground and the buildings are the oldest and they've stood many storms. So we were, luckily a block from where I actually lived. So I just called a bunch of neighbors. I'm like, I'm sending 15 crew members to shelter in your house right now. I hope that's okay. We'll send over a king cake later. Thank you. And just sort of try to make the best of it, and called a bunch of shops and be like, I'm about to send you 20 people to your coffee shop. They need to shelter in place, because you don't have somewhere to actually just send the crew automatically. But the French Quarter can't even accommodate buses or anything. And the tornado came upon us very quickly. But where it came through was the location we had just left. So we were very lucky. There was several shows that were shooting at the ranch in St. Bernard Parish and in the area that we had just left in Holy Cross that had things come through. Nobody was hurt, mercifully, but that was definitely a challenge. And everyone was very bonded after spending a lot of time in close proximity as we were sort of doing the countdown of, all right, here it is, because it was hopping around. It was, ended up sort of the closest it came to us was about 2 miles away. So everyone breathed a nice sigh of relief. And the schedule changes, it drove a lot of issues with agriculture because with a limited budget, we were filming a lot of stuff in sugarcane country. And sugarcane is a very valuable crop that harvests in November and December. And part of how they harvest it is they burn the cane to sort of caramelize the roots, which allows the cane to regenerate in another season. And so we had to time all that out because we couldn't afford to buy the crop. So we needed to keep rescouting fields that would work as the farmers were making their ways across, because we could only afford small hectares. And that part was really insane. And so I spent a lot of time with farmers every morning just recalibrating. Okay, so if we get the combines to cut the cane from this direction, and you think, how am I here? And I have no idea what I'm doing.
That
But,
is quite, that's quite a set of challenges. And of course, we can all relate to, dealing with personal stuff, constant schedule changes, and just, inclement weather. But that's all the time we have. I'm going to pass this on to Miguel. Thank you so much for joining us, Batu.
Thank you.
And good luck. And I'm going to pass this on to Miguel Tapia, who's going to be talking about I'm Still Here.
Hi, everyone. Unfortunately, our panelist for I'm Still Here is unable to join us because they're having connection issues. So I'm just going to share a little message about the film. I would encourage everyone to please watch the film if you have an opportunity. It is the first Brazilian film to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture. So that's a feat in and of itself. It is, from what I've gathered, a film by Brazilians for Brazilians, telling really a celebratory story about the Brazilian experience, especially as a period piece telling the story of this family. It was shot all on location. There's no stage work. So that's another reason why we want to take the moment to watch this film so that we can celebrate it as location managers. So thank you very much. And also thank you to all the other panelists for the discussions. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Miguel. And it is a bummer that they couldn't make it, but do please watch the film, everyone, and let's all obviously support each other in locations. Thank you again to all our panelists. I wanted Diego Dosa to just show his face for a second. Diego was was going to be the location manager. Diego scouted for about 1.5 years on Emilia Perez, which never ended up shooting in Mexico or frankly on location anywhere. So unfortunately, we're not celebrating Diego's film today, but just wanted to give him a good nod because that's another one of the Oscar nominees. And going back to us again, so thank you to all our panelists, our moderators. Thank you all for attending. It was great to see everybody, great discussion, and appreciate you all spending this time with us. Bye-bye.